Greetings and salutations, friends. Well, if you've ever made a website or a web application, you're going to need to know how to make forms. So that's what this video is going to be all about. We're going to go through making a form with ReasonML, Reason React. I'm going to show you how to handle the styling and validation and displaying different validation states within the form. And we're going to make it nice and modular with some reusable form field components. So let's get stuck straight into it. Let's go smash some code. There are two main libraries for using forms with ReasonML, Reason React, bs-reform and re-formality. I tried both of them. I found that re-formality was a little bit more suited to my coding style. I also reached out to the community and asked what everyone else is using. It seems like they're both decent. For the purpose of this video, we're going to go with re-formality. I've become quite comfortable with it. So first thing, of course, is to install the npm package. And then, of course, if you haven't guessed by now, which you should know by now if you've been following my recent videos, is you need to add it to the BS dependencies within your BS config. And of course, we want to add it to the transpile modules of our next config.js. Since the last video, version 7 of Bucklescript has been released. So I've updated my package.json to use the latest version of Bucklescript. However, please note that the version of GraphQL PPX that we've used in previous videos does not play nice with Bucklescript version 7. So you will need to yarn, get rid of that one, get rid of GraphQL_PPX and yarn add this one here. Then of course we need to add it to the PPX flags in our bs-config.json, and I'm just going to replace the existing one. You can also delete the old GraphQL PPX from your package.json. A couple of other loose ends. If we're upgrading Bucklescript, we want to upgrade our Reason Apollo and Reason Apollo hooks as well. Otherwise, we're going to get some errors there as well. So once you do all these, just run a yarn install. The other thing is that in the most recent version of Apollo hooks, the way we actually use the hook has changed. So let's fix that up now. I'm going to do it this way. Open Apollo hooks. We don't need to run Apollo hooks query.make anymore. We can just simply say here, use query, and pass in our list post query definition. Actually, I've decided I don't like that word config. Okay, and that is pretty much all of the housekeeping that you need to do for an upgrade to the latest version of Bucklescript version 7 from our previous project. If we ever look at the GitHub homepage for re-formality and jump into one of the examples there, you can see that they are quite comprehensive, and but they put everything in a single page. So I'm going to show you how to do something similar, but break this up into a more modularized way so we can reuse, say, import field components and text field components. We'll also use bulma styling to display the different validation states of the fields as well. So a field will show up with a red border, for example, if it's not valid, or green if it is valid, with a little validation message. The first thing we're going to do is create a PostForm folder. What I'd like to do is actually put everything in relating to post in its own folder. So I've popped everything in this post folder, and now I'm going to create a separate post form folder where we'll keep everything relating to the forms. Then we're going to create a PostForm config. This file is going to include all of the things relating to the form, its fields, its validation, and its state. So we start by, let's open formality. I'm going to define a variant, which is the crown jewel of ReasonML. If you look at its documentation, the ReasonML documentation, that's what it's described as. And if you may recall from the GraphQL schema that we defined in an earlier video, there are 3 main fields that we need here in our blog post, and tags. Then we're going to define the form state. A few other requisite things that formality wants. Whether we use these remains to be seen, but they are required. If you don't include them, formality will throw. Now we define various modules for each of the form fields, and the main purpose of these is to tell re-formality how to update those fields from our form, and then include a validator which specifies some validation rules. So we'll just start with our simple title field, which will be required. I'm just going to paste that in. So you can see the very first part here is defining what update means, and it's going to essentially just update our state with a new title value that gets passed in, and we define a validator. And in this instance, validate title is saying that, well, if it's empty, then it's going to throw an error, and the message is going to be title is required. It'll be the same thing for the body field. And of course, it'll be the same thing for the tags field as well. We're just going to make all fields required. Then finally, we define validators being essentially a list of our validators. And that is our PostForm config. Oh, and I have made one little mistake here. That should be submission error. I do want to show you just one thing quickly. If you have a look at the login form example on the re-formality GitHub page, which I will link to below, you can see some other ways of doing validation. For example, if you have an email field, then you can define an email regex and a pattern match to handle that particular validation, i.e. if it's empty, then the error will be email is required. Otherwise, if it doesn't satisfy the email regex, then the error will be email is invalid. So yes, that's just another example of how you can use validation. So now that we've defined our PostForm config, we can actually create our PostForm React component. So let's do that. First thing is to define our PostForm hook. And to do that, we're going to call the formality.make function and pass in the config that we just created. Then we can define our React component, which will be display actual form itself. Always define our make function. Now, if you recall from earlier tutorial videos where we created our schema, you'll remember that our post object has the author details in it as well. For the purpose of this video, I'm not going to actually do a Apollo hook mutation. I will save that for a subsequent video. For this video, I just want to focus on creating the form and showing you how re-formality works, showing how validations work, and to submit, we're just going to log the results to the console for now. But we will definitely go into a little bit more detail later on in another video. So for now, we're just going to pass in a author ID. We're going to define our initial state. Body, tags, everything's going to be obviously blank for now. Actually, did we add the post author ID in our form? I don't think we did, which we should. That's also a string. Okay, now we can define our actual form itself using the PostForm hook dot use form. We're going to pass in the initial state, and we're going to define what happens on submit. And again, in this case, we're just going to log to the console. Now let's add the outer shell of our form HTML. And in here, I'm going to sort of fill in the blanks. These are where our form fields will go and our submit button. But I want to create a reusable module for each of our form field types. So in this case, we just want an input field and a text field. So under layout, because these are going to be reusable items, I'm going to create a new folder called form. And inside there, I'm going to create start with our input field. And we're just going to pop that in here. So you can see that this takes a bunch of arguments, including the actual form value that this field is going to relate to, the validation result, which is going to be handled in our switch statement below. It's also going to get passed to this input field styles, which we'll do in a moment, to actually display the correct color border around the bulma input field, depending on whether it's in a valid state or not. So we'll have a look at that now, and then just come back to this in a moment. I'm going to create a new file for the form styles. We've had a look at in depth how to use styles in episode video number 2. If you want to go back and revisit that, handling styles with bs-css and bulma. So here's the input field styles that we just saw a moment ago in our input field.re file. So you can see it's going to accept an argument for field state, and we're going to pass that into a function that we've defined up here called get field state style. And so here you can see there's another switch statement which depending on the field state is going to return different styles, which will display it in our input field. So stick with me. I'm hoping this is all making sense to you. So if that particular field state, that form result is not in a valid state as defined in our PostForm config earlier, then we're going to display the bulma class for is danger. If everything is okay, it's going to be is success, which is going to give it a green border, and if it hasn't been touched, there's no value, then don't do anything. Just keep it as the default. And similarly for other fields that we're going to create, the text area field style, same sort of thing. We can reuse all this, pass in the field state, and display the correct color border depending on the validation state. So that's going to handle the color of the border of the input field. And of course, the error message that we display here is also going to be handled in this switch statement. So again, if the result, if it's not valid, then we're going to display the error message that we defined in the PostForm config. So going back to the PostForm config, you can see that the error message, if the say that the first field title is not valid, it's going to say, well, hang on, title is required. So I hope all of that makes sense. All of this, of course, is going to be up in my GitHub. I didn't want to sort of, waste time typing this all out. That's going to be pretty boring just watching me type. I'd rather spend the time explaining it. And by all means, if you've got any questions, just post them in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. We can now use the input field that we've just created. And you can see all of the props or arguments that we're passing in that we've defined in the input field component. A few things to draw your attention to: the actual value, the actual form value, the result from the validation, what happens on change. Well, we want to call the update method of the PostForm config title field, passing in the form state and the new value, if you recall. We can also reuse our input field with all its styles and functionality for the tags input as well. So we don't have to repeat any of the HTML or styling. Just pass in the values, pass in which actual fields we want to update from our form config, handle its own validation. So this is nice and modular. I also want to define a similar reusable field as a text field, or text area field, I should say. So let's create a text area field. And it'll be very similar to the input field, in that it's going to take all the same arguments, but it's going to obviously use a text area component instead of an input field component. But in terms of the way it calls that updates the style, obviously we're going to call the text area field styles instead of the input field styles, and we're going to display an error message if the text area is in an error state. Now we can hop back to our PostForm component, and let's pop that text. Let's use that text area field for the body of our blog post. Give it the ID of post body, have a little placeholder there, write your blog here. And again, we're handling the body result validation. On change, we're passing the update value from our PostForm config, the form state, and the actual field that we're targeting, which again in this case is the body of the blog post. So that's only part of our form. We also want to create a submit and cancel button. So I'm going to put that in a separate React component as well. So let's create a new React component here called submit button. Again, this is using classes from Bulma styling to show some buttons. And what we want to do is show buttons in different states depending on what the form's actually doing. So if the form has been submitted, we want to show a little check mark and the green button with the word saved. If it's submitting, we want to show the is loading state. So it'll be a little spinner there, which Bulma provides us. But otherwise, just its default state, which will be the submit button. And of course, down here, there'll be the cancel button. So we're going to pass into it the form status, so we can actually handle the various button states. And we want to pass in the reset capability. So when we click cancel, the form actually resets. Oh, and worth noticing here, I'm using FontAwesome to display a little check mark. I'm not going to go through that now, but if you have a look at the GitHub, you can see under in my _app JS page where I've imported the FontAwesome library and how I've initiated that using the FA check, and also I've created a binding for FontAwesome icon in the bindings folder. So we've covered bindings in previous videos. I won't explain that, but that's how you can quickly get FontAwesome working with ReasonML, Reason React. So let's head back to our PostForm page and let's plonk that submit button down here. So again, we're passing in the form status and form reset. And one more thing I'd like to create is a small notification section at the top as well, just to say the form's been submitted, yay, or there's been an error submitting the form, say a server error perhaps. So let's add a new file called, let's call this notification. And let's pop in that. So again, similar to the form, similar to the submit button, we're going to pass it the form status and display some different things just depending on what the status of the form is. So if the form is saved, we can say, hey, it's yay, form is saved. Otherwise, there's been a server error. And let's plonk that up here just above the title field. Now to actually display our form, I'm going to create a page route in the pages directory, which we'll call create post. It'll be a React component. And we're just going to output a new section. We're going to pass in a hard-coded author ID for now, 1234. And now we should actually be able to open up this route and see our handiwork. Hooray! There is our form, and if all has gone to plan, I should be able to click on this and tab out of it, and we see our error state. And we also see our error state there. If I start typing something, as the form field is a required field, it goes green. Yes, it's valid. And of course, if we, this is the body, the tags are also required. Just going to say comma separated. I might do another video later on making a nice looking tag input field. So let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do something like that. So I'm going to open up the console and make sure, let's see if we actually see the output of our submit. Excellent. And there are the contents of our form field. So once again, in a subsequent video, I'm going to do a Apollo hooks mutation with Reason React, where we're going to create a new blog post in our AppSync GraphQL server. So that should be pretty cool. And that's about it. That's our forms with Reason React using re-formality and bulma for styling in a nutshell. So there it is. That's how you do forms with ReasonML, Reason React using re-formality. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please share it around, leave a thumbs up, leave a comment, let me know what you thought of it. Any tips and tricks that I've missed that you guys know about, I'm interested in knowing about. Again, please leave a comment. I don't really get anything out of doing these videos other than a little bit of personal satisfaction from spreading the joy. So please do share it around if you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it useful. See you in the next video.